I'm glad Brian came today because we have a legitimate farmer, and I'm talking farming today. This is going to be who's been watching the news and has been excited about what could be happening prophetically. It's okay to raise your hand. I'm going to raise mine. Yeah, okay. Who's been riding that roller coaster for more than 10 years watching prophecy? And now we're talking different ball game, right? 20 years, right? We tend to get excited. And even back in Peter's day, he was talking about there are going to be scoffers coming and saying, where is the promise of his coming? That's been 2,000 years ago. So here we are, and we're still waiting for that promise. But I wanted to talk today about the fig tree nation. You guys have heard that phrase, I'm sure some of you. My background on this kind of stuff, I come from a preterist background. I was born and raised in the Church of Christ. So we were taught that all prophecy pretty much was fulfilled on or around 70 AD. So how that works with the 1,000 years in Revelation and the Great White Throne Judgment and the New Jerusalem, who knows? But it's all over and done. I just have a hard time believing that. So that's why I'm doing a study like this. So the fig tree nation, the idea is, and we'll read some scriptures here to get started that kind of set it up, but the idea is that Israel is associated in the Bible with lots of things. It's associated with an olive tree, it's associated with a vine, it's associated with a fig tree, lots of things. But when we look at the fig tree, we have a very specific parable from the Master in Matthew. We'll read that here in a minute. And it's set up, I don't know if anybody remembers. Do you guys remember the Great Disappointment in 2018? 2018 specifically. It came and went, and it reminded me I wasn't around in 1844 for the Great Disappointment with the Millerites, but the Millerites back then, they were convinced that you count 1,260 days, times a year, 1,260 years from whatever date it was, and then that's when the Messiah was going to return. So 1844 came and went, and that's where we get the Great Disappointment from. As I understand it, the Seventh-day Adventists were kind of an offshoot of that. Ellen White was basically like, well, no, it really did happen in 1844. It just all happened spiritually. So that's why we didn't see it happen here. So it's kind of one of those kind of ways to just kind of wave it off, like, oh, well, we were right the whole time. But in 2018, a lot of people, and I won't name names, but a lot of people, prophetic ministries in mainstream Christianity, specifically the evangelical persuasion, a lot of folks in the Torah community, we're talking about 2018 as a possible year that Messiah would return. And they got it from a specific scripture that we'll read here in a minute. So Israel is the fig tree nation. We'll just go ahead and just state the thesis and the conclusion. Israel is the fig tree nation. We're not going to counter that at all. But what we're going to do is expand it. We're going to look at what does that mean for the folks over there in the Holy Land and for us here in Josylvania. So, okay. Matthew 24. I have to start with Matthew 24. We don't have a ton of scripture to read because I want to leave the floor open at the end of this for questions and comments. But Matthew 24, we'll start reading in verse 1. Okay. This is the famous Olivet Discourse. Joshua came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he said to them, do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another which will not be torn down. As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us then, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So, I always like to point out, they didn't say end of the world. There's a big difference between end of the world and end of the age. And Joshua, or Jesus in our English, answered and said to them, see to it that no one misleads you. For many will come in my name or my authority, saying, I am the Messiah, and will mislead many. You will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars, kind of like now. See that you are not frightened, for these things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs, or some translations will say beginning of sorrows. Now, if you've been tracking what's going on in Israel for the past several decades, this is not the first time something like this has happened. We had a war with Hamas back in 2000, no, was it 14? Yeah, 14. There was a war with Lebanon, I think, in 2010. There was another war with Hamas in Gaza back in 2006. You can just keep going. You've got the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War. Of course, you've got the War of Independence in 1948, and a whole bunch of battles in between. So we've been hearing about this forever. This is not the first time. So verse 9, then they will deliver you, and this is where the preterists got excited, because he's talking to people, presumably, right in front of him, that are obviously not alive today. So they will look at this and they'll say, okay, he's talking to people that are alive then, which means all of this is going to be fulfilled in their lifetimes. Like I said earlier, I disagree with that stance. They will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations because of my name. At that time, many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. And I was always, taught, well, that's like lawless, like the Wild West, right? You can just bang, bang, shoot them up and just do whatever you want to do. And because people are unloving and our love is growing cold, it leads to the Wild, Wild West. But if we slow down and read it, I'd like to always point this out. It's the lawlessness that's causing the love to grow cold, not the other way around. And of course, we've picked up over the years that Yahweh's holy commandments are how we love. It's how we love our neighbor. It's how we love him. So if we take away the law, take away the Torah, we take away the means that the Father has given us to show love. You can still show love in some ways, but not in the perfect way that he gave us. Let's see, verse 13. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. The gospel, the good news of the kingdom, will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. So we still got nations that have no clue what the gospel of the kingdom is. So there's kind of a time marker right there. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which is spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Of course, we know we need to read this with Luke 21 and Mark 13, I think. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever's on the housetop must not go down to get the things that are in his house. Whoever's in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. So there's another time marker. This whole thing he's talking about here has to be the worst ever. This is, you can't get past this in worsitude, to make up another word. I've been doing that all day today. Worseness, I guess, would be severity. We'll say severity. There we go. Verse 22. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe him. For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance. Why? Because he doesn't want us to be deceived. He doesn't want us to be misled. So if they say to you, behold, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. Or, behold, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. So this is all in the context of what he's talking about. He's setting up what's going to come, what's going to signify his coming in the end of the age. We are going to get to the fig tree here in a minute. Verse 29, but immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky. The powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. Here we go. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So you too, when you see all these things, all the things he just talked about, When you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So I'm just going to stop right there. The 2018 date was taken knowing that Israel is the fig tree nation. And the idea was, well, Israel became a nation in 1948. Okay, well, this generation won't pass until everything happens. How long is a generation? Is it 20 years? Is it 40 years? You know, of course, those year markers come and go. So like 20 years comes, well, maybe it's not 20, maybe it's 40. 40 years comes, well, maybe it's not 40. So the teachers that had the 2018 date, they all settled on 70 years. Okay, so 1948 plus 70, a lot of us homeschool, we could do math in our heads. And for those that don't, it's pretty easy to do anyway. But that takes us to 2018. And he didn't come. So a lot of people became, at least that I saw, became disillusioned with the whole, you know, some people became disillusioned with the word in general. Some people, it was more prophecy related, like, I'm out, I'm not going to study prophecy anymore. You know, it's the roller coaster, it's just too much. So we kind of need to take a look at like how we define the fig tree. What are we looking for? Because we know that we're supposed to look for it. He gave us this parable. Let's go to Hosea 9:10. This is going to be the other primary scripture that people use to identify Israel as the fig tree nation. Hosea comes after Daniel. And to me, Hosea is the prodigal son book of the Bible. If you want to know what the parable of the prodigal son means, Hosea is where it's at. Hosea chapter 9, let's read verse 10. I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your forefathers as the earliest fruit in the fig tree in its first season. And then, of course, this is nested in this whole history of Israel. So he finds Israel like grapes in the wilderness. Okay, so there's a grape comparison. I saw your forefathers as the earliest fruit on the fig tree in its first season. Now, my Bible has season in italics, which means in the Hebrew that word for season is not actually there. The translators put it there to flesh out the context. So he's talking about Israel as being this early fruit on the fig tree. Now, a lot of you guys know that a fig tree typically will have 2 crops of figs. Now, I've maxed out my knowledge of fig horticulture short of actually owning a fig orchard and operating it. So if Brian has anything to contribute, I don't know how knowledgeable you are in figs.
I have
but,
one fig tree.
Okay.
And it does have 2 crops.
2 crops, bingo. And what do we call the first one?
I don't know. First fruits, I guess.
The internet told me.
Okay.
It's the breba crop. B-R-E-B-A. It comes from a Spanish word that means breba. So I don't know what the Spanish word means. So it has 2 crops, and it puts one on. I feel like this is saggy. It puts one on in the spring, and then let's go righty tighty there. It puts one on in the spring, and then it puts one on in the summer to late summer. And so typically, the spring crop is edible, but it's inferior. And as I understand it, what happens is when the tree comes back to life in the spring, it hasn't been pollinated. So these fruits, they just basically come out of the wood, the budding wood. There's no flower or anything. So you can eat them, but they're really low quality, and a lot of farmers will just cut them off and pitch them, basically just to prune the tree so that it has resources for the summer crop. The summer crop is the one you want. That's where those sweet, juicy figs that they make all the fig Newtons out of come from. Fig Newtons are corn syrup. It's a joke, guys. No, but so it is important. This is really important. When we're looking at Israel as the fig tree nation, we need to recognize that a fig tree has 2 crops. And so when we're looking around at the world to identify where we're at in this, we need to identify which crop we're looking at. So let's go to Jeremiah 24. Jeremiah comes after Isaiah and before Ezekiel. Okay. Now, they call Jeremiah the weeping prophet for a reason. He had a lot to deal with. He spent years and years and years warning the people what was going to come for their transgression and rebelliousness, and they didn't heed him. So he had to watch his people suffer. And can you imagine having a relative or a child and you see them going down the wrong road, and no matter what you do to warn them, they just will not come off the road, and you have to watch that train crash? That was Jeremiah's life. Jeremiah 24. After Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the officials of Judah with the craftsmen and smiths from Jerusalem, and had brought them to Babylon, Yahweh showed me, Jeremiah, behold, 2 baskets of figs set before the temple of Yahweh. And just to pause real quick, what he just mentioned here, Nebuchadnezzar taking away the officials of Judah, the craftsmen, the smiths, this is kind of what we read about in the book of Daniel. Daniel, the young men, the nobles, these young people who had skills, who had knowledge that were useful to the king. They were taken away into Babylon to serve the king there. So that's where we get the book of Daniel. I think Ezekiel, some scholars say he might have been part of that group. Maybe he wasn't. It's kind of ambiguous that I've seen. But that's the context, time-wise. So verse 2, one basket had very good figs, like first ripe figs, like we just mentioned, and the other basket had very bad figs, which could not be eaten due to rottenness. Then Yahweh said to me, what do you see, Jeremiah? And I said, figs, the good figs, very good, and the bad figs, very bad, which cannot be eaten due to rottenness. Then the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, thus says Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, like these good figs, so I will regard as good the captives of Judah, whom I have sent out of this place into the land of the Chaldeans. For I will set my eyes on them for good, and I will bring them again to this land. And I will build them up and not overthrow them, and I will plant them and not pluck them up. I will give them a heart to know me, for I am Yahweh, and they will be my people, and I will be their Elohim. For they will return to me with their whole heart. So we're just going to pause right there. When you would bring fruit to the temple, there were basically 2 reasons you would do it. You would bring fruit as a first fruit offering. So let's say you were a farmer, and you were going to bring the best of your crop as an offering to Yahweh. You would bring it to the temple. The other scenario would be is if you were going to pay a tithe out of your produce. You would bring that to the temple as well, and that would be for the priests for food because they didn't have real jobs, right? So that's the 2 basic scenarios. So these baskets of figs, you could argue, are offerings to Yahweh in some capacity because they're brought to him at the temple. So this first batch is good. This represents the Jews who would listen to Jeremiah. And he said, just go to Babylon. It's like when we deal with our children, we say, just take your punishment, take your grounding, take your little, pat on the butt, whatever it is, and let's just move on with life, But the people decided to be that kid that just throws a fit. They roll their eyes, I hate you, mom and dad, that nobody's dealt with that, right? So, but that's what most of the people did. So the obedient ones, the ones that heeded the words of the prophets, were the ones that he's calling the good fruit. And it's important for context. I just want to read it again in verse 6. I will set my eyes on them for good, and I will bring them again into this land, which we know that after the Babylonian exile, a lot of brother Judah did come back into the land, although most of them stayed behind. They had jobs, they had nice houses, they had families. Why pack up and leave? But, we did have a few faithful that did come in. And build them up and not overthrow them, and I will plant them and not pluck them up. Now this is interesting because we know Judah's been plucked up many times since then. We know 70 AD under Titus was a big one. Most of them, if not all of them, were expelled from the land at that point. So it's not like Judah collectively got to come back to the land after the exile and they just stayed there and life was peachy. But yet Jeremiah is saying, with the words of Yahweh here, he will plant them and not pluck them up. Verse 8, but like the bad figs, which cannot be eaten due to rottenness, indeed, thus says Yahweh, so I will abandon Zedekiah, king of Judah, and his officials, and the remnant of Jerusalem who remain in this land, and the ones who dwell in the land of Egypt. I will make them a terror and an evil for all the kingdoms of the earth, as a reproach and a proverb, a taunt and a curse in all the places where I will scatter them. I will send the sword, the famine, and pestilence upon them until they are destroyed from the land which I gave to them and their forefathers. So this second group of people in the kingdom of Judah, these are the ones that are, following after the flesh. These are ones that are saying, when you read all through the book of Jeremiah, he's constantly battling these false prophets who were saying, well, we're going to win. We're going to defeat the Babylonians. We need to make an alliance with Egypt. And, we're making political deals. We're, maybe doing weapons trades with NATO. And, that's how it would be in modern times, right? Who are we putting our trust in when we do that, right? So they are going to be destroyed from the land. But the batch of good figs is going to be allowed to be brought back into the land. So let's go to Mark 11. So we've got this fig tree that we know has good fruit and it has bad fruit. I want to be good fruit. Mark 11. We're going to read verses 1 through 34. Okay, so, somebody said 33. Yeah, there is only, I don't know why I did 34. Maybe that's in the Apocrypha. Okay, so as they approached Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mountain of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, go into the village opposite you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there on which no one yet has ever sat. Untie it and bring it here. Of course, most of us know the significance of that, right? He would ride in on the colt of a donkey. He's fulfilling prophecy here. If anyone says to you, why are you doing this? You say, the master has need of it, and immediately he will send it back here. They went away and found a colt tied at the door outside in the street, and they untied it. Some of the bystanders were saying to them, what are you doing, untying the colt? They spoke to them just as Joshua had told them, and they gave them permission. They brought the colt to Joshua and put their coats on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their coats in the road, and others spread leafy branches which they had cut from the fields. Those who went in front and those who followed were shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest. And to really understand what's going on here, when you go back to the ancient Near East culture, which we were kind of in that time frame here even, when a conquering king came in, and this is documented in the Cyrus scroll, when Cyrus of Persia came in and conquered Jerusalem, it says in that scroll that the people did exactly this to him. They laid their coats out, they laid palms out, and they basically were saying, okay, we know that you're conquering us, but we're going to submit you. We're going to welcome you in as our ruler. So that's exactly what they're doing. They're not just saying this guy's the Messiah. They're welcoming Yahshua as a conquering king by doing this ritual. Ritual is maybe not the right word, custom. So Yahshua entered in Jerusalem, verse 11, and he came into the temple. And after looking around at everything, he left for Bethany with the 12, since it was already late. That's really interesting. Has anyone done a word study on like time of visitation? Jerusalem, your time of visitation. When you look at it in the Greek and the Hebrew, it has to do with kind of like an inspection. So like, let's say you work in a factory and OSHA shows up. Well, that's your time of visitation. So this is what he's doing. He walks in and he just looks around. He's inspecting. He's inspecting the fruit, dare we say. Verse 12, on the next day, when he had left Bethany, he became hungry. Seeing at a distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to it to see if perhaps he would find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. Interesting. He said to it, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples were listening. So he just curses this poor fig tree. And it's not even in season. It's not like it's late summer and this fig tree is supposed to have this awesome crop, but it doesn't. It's out of season. And he curses it anyway. And I know that a lot of mainstream Christian writers will say that this is where he's prophesying the full-on rejection of the Jews, right? Because we know that the church teaches that the Jews were disregarded, they were cast aside. Now the Gentile church comes in and replaces them. Even though the new covenant's made with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not with the Gentiles. Although indirectly if they're grafted in, but that's Romans 11, that's the whole thing. So he curses this poor fig tree. Verse 15, they came to Jerusalem. He entered the temple and began to drive out those who were buying and selling in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he would not permit anyone to carry merchandise through the temple. And if I just pause and think about this logically, there probably were hundreds of people in the temple. And they let this one man walk in there and just handle them. Like, if I imagine, like, in this room here, if I just all of a sudden, I'm going to make you guys get up and leave your chairs, and I'm going to kick you guys out and make you go to the parking lot. Yeah, right, that's not going to happen. But he's able to single-handedly handle his Father's business. And that's amazing to me. The people are actually seeing his authority, and they're accepting it. The people that count. The leadership, obviously not. So verse 17, he began to teach and say to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a robber's den. The chief priests and the scribes heard this and began seeking how to destroy him, for they were afraid of him. For the whole crowd was astonished at his teaching. When evening came, they would go out of the city, him and his disciples. And as they were passing by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots up. If a tree withers from the roots up, it's dead. You're not bringing that tree back. This tree is gone. So it's withered from the roots up. Verse 21, being reminded, Peter said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered. As if that should be shocking. But yet he was. And Yahshua answered, saying, have you faith in Elohim? Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says is going to happen, it will be granted him. Therefore I say to you, all things for which you pray and ask, believe that you have received them, and they will be granted you. Whenever you stand praying, forgive, if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father who is in heaven will also forgive you your transgressions. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father who is in heaven forgive your transgressions. And I'm just going to finish out the chapter. They came again to Jerusalem. As he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him and began saying to him, by what authority are you doing these things? Or who gave you this authority to do these things? And Yahshua said to them, I will ask you one question and you answer me. Then I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men? Answer me. I love this. They began reasoning among themselves, saying, if we say from heaven, he will say, then why did you not believe him? But if we say from men, because they were afraid of the people, for everyone considered John to have been a real prophet. Answering Yahshua, they said, we do not know. And Yahshua said to them, nor will I tell you by what authority I do these things. So I wanted to read the whole chapter. That last bit doesn't pertain directly to the fig tree. I just like reading it because I serve the boss. Hopefully you guys too. So this poor fig tree is cursed from the roots up. This poor fig tree can never, ever grow back. And, the mainstream will say, well, that's Judah, that's the Jews. They've been cast off forever. But we know from other places, we just read in Jeremiah 24, there's going to be some of these figs that are good fruit that are going to be planted and never plucked up. So this fig tree, if it's symbolic of the fig tree, Israel, cannot apply to those fruits. Okay? So let's go to Matthew 21. Is everyone tracking so far? I realize this is abstract, and I prayed really hard, to Abba leading up to this, that he would be able to give me the words to convey this, because I do think it's really important at the times we're in. But sometimes I have trouble getting my thoughts into words. So Matthew 21, helps if I go the right way. Matthew 21, we'll read verses 18 through 22. This is the parallel account from Matthew. Matthew 21, 18 through 22. Now in the morning, when he was returning to the city, he became hungry. Seeing a lone fig tree by the road, he came to it and found nothing on it except leaves only. And he said to it, no longer shall there ever be any fruit from you. And at once the fig tree withered. Seeing this, the disciples were amazed and asked, how did the fig tree wither all at once? I like how they asked the how did it happen as opposed to why did it happen. And Yahshua answered and said to them, truly I say to you, If you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, it will happen. And all things you ask in prayer, believe you will receive. So this is, like I said, the parallel account. And he doubles down. He says, no longer shall there ever be any fruit from you. As if there's any doubt. This fig tree is not coming back. This fig tree is never going to bear fruit. So we keep this in mind when we look at, Israel as the fig tree nation, when we're looking around prophetically. So I came to see this week that there are two kingdoms where this whole fig language takes us. And I'm going to try to make this point. Let's go to 1 Kings. Kings comes after Chronicles. Before Chronicles. I know you grown-ups know, but I like to do that for the youngsters sometimes. 1 Kings, let's go to chapter 4. Now we're going to read verses 21 through 25. Now, this is dealing with the reign of Solomon. Chapter 4, verses 21 through 25. Now Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed oxen. That pasture-fed beef was a thing back then, even without Whole Foods. 100 sheep besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. For he had dominion over everything west of the river, from Tifsah even to Gaza, over all the kings west of the river, and he had peace on all sides around him. So Judah and Israel lived in safety, every man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba all the days of Solomon. So we see this language describing Solomon's kingdom. It's a unified kingdom, we know that historically, but the writer of the text is still talking about Israel and Judah, even back then, before the split, which is interesting to me. But he's talking about they're living in safety. So, Israel is possessing the land. When we talk about Israel possessing the land, it's not just they live there, it's they have control, they have dominion over it. And so they're possessing the land, and they have safety. And this every man under his vine and his fig tree is kind of an idiom to kind of say that. And we're going to see that in the prophets. So this is a peaceful kingdom, we would say, right? Solomon's at peace. There's no war. It's as it's supposed to be. Now, Solomon's personal life is a mess. He's a little Jerry Springer-ish there, but hopefully he repented and was forgiven. I'd like to think so. So let's go to Micah chapter 4. And of course, some people are like, who's Jerry Springer? He was the mayor of some town back in the 90s. I can't remember the name of the city. Minnesota? I don't remember. So Micah chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. I love this chapter. And it's parallel to the book of Isaiah. It will come about in the last days, which that's what we're talking about. Hopefully that's our time, because I don't know how much longer we as humanity can sustain this, or the earth itself can sustain our silliness. It will come about in the last days, the mountain of the house of Yahweh will be established as the chief of the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and the peoples will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh, and to the house of the Elohim of Jacob, that he may teach us about his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. So I always have to break this down every time I read it. So Zion is established here. The king is on the throne. And the Gentiles, the nations, are hearing about this. And they're like, we want to be a part of this kingdom. What do we do? Sign us up. So they all come. They show up. And they want to learn the ways of the Father. So what does the Father do? There in verse 2. For from Zion will go forth the law, the Torah, even the word from Jerusalem. So Yahweh's like, okay, you guys want to come learn my ways? Here are my ways. Here is my Torah. Here is my law. It's really straightforward. And, I struggle to see how people in the mainstream miss it, but it's right here. Okay, so even the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem, he will judge between many peoples and render decisions for mighty distant nations. Then they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they train for war. This is why I'm not a praetorist. We're not in a spot right now. We're still training for war. So this kingdom has never existed in human history, the best that I can tell. Each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree, with no one to make them afraid. For the mouth of Yahweh of hosts has spoken. Though all the peoples walk each in the name of his God or his Elohim, as for us, we will walk in the name, the authority of Yahweh our Elohim forever and ever. In that day, declares Yahweh, I will assemble the lame and gather the outcasts, even those whom I have afflicted. I have afflicted. Yahweh does afflict his people. I will make the lame a remnant and the outcasts a strong nation, and Yahweh will reign over them in Mount Zion, from now on and forever. As for you, tower of the flock, hill of the daughter of Zion, to you it will come, even the former dominion will come, the kingdom of the daughter of Jerusalem. And so I just love that. I just absolutely love it. To me, this is why I live and breathe, to be a part of this kingdom. And, hopefully I get to be one of the people that gets sent out to teach the nations the Torah. We have the idea of the Levites. They're supposed to go out and teach the law to the people. So now let's go to Zechariah 3. We're going to reinforce this. We're almost done. Zechariah 3. We're going to read verses 8 through 10. And this is about the branch. Now listen, our English says Joshua, but it's the same Hebrew as Yahshua, Yeshua, Yehoshua, however different people pronounce it, the name of our Savior. Joshua the high priest, you and your friends who are sitting in front of you, indeed they are men who are assembled. For behold, I'm going to bring in my servant the branch. For behold, the stone that I have set before Joshua, on one stone are 7 eyes. Behold, I will engrave an inscription on it, declares Yahweh of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of that land in one day. In that day, the day when he removes the iniquity from the land, Yahweh of hosts says, every one of you will invite his neighbor to sit under his vine and under his fig tree. So we're connecting this kingdom here. This is Zion with a king. This is the culmination of the age. This is his people being forgiven of their sins, not just on a personal level, but corporately. And so this is what we're all striving for. This is why we want to be one of those figs that was listening to Jeremiah, because Jeremiah was seeing big picture where the kingdom was going. The king and his counselors were myopic. They were looking just what's in front of us. We have a threat militarily. We have to react. We have to enter into treaties and do all this kind of stuff, forgetting that a king sits on the throne even if we can't see him. So let's go to 2 Kings. We're going to take a look at what I think is a glimpse of the second kingdom. Because remember, there are 2 types of figs. 2 Kings chapter 18. This will be our last scripture. We're going to read 28 through 32. This is when Sennacherib, king of Assyria, invades Jerusalem. And Hezekiah, the king, has never felt this level of anxiety in his life. He is shaking in his sandals. So let's read starting in verse 28. The messenger of the king is sent. Am I in the right spot? 2 Kings 18. Oh, I'm in 19. Let's go back. Where'd you go? There we go. Okay. Then Rabshakeh, who is the messenger of the king of Assyria, stood and cried with a loud voice in Judean, saying, hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. So he could speak Assyrian. Hezekiah at his court probably would have understood it. But he's speaking Judean. He wants the common man to hear this. He wants to put the fear in these people. Hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you from my hand. Nor let Hezekiah make you trust in Yahweh, saying, Yahweh will surely deliver us, and this city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, Make your peace with me and come out to me and eat each of his vine and each of his fig tree and drink each of the waters of his own cistern. He's talking peace. Until I come and take you away to a land like your own, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and honey, that they may live and not die. But do not listen to Hezekiah when he misleads you, saying, Yahweh will deliver us. So the king of Assyria is saying, I want to give you guys peace. I could come in here and slaughter you guys like all the other nations I just conquered, but I want to give you guys peace. You guys can eat of your own vine and your own fig tree, drink your own water for now, but eventually I'm going to move you out of the land. You'll do the same thing there. It'll still be a good life, but I can't leave you here in this land. That was the policy of the Assyrians. They would move you out of the land over to someplace else and bring foreigners to the land where you live. That's where we get the Samaritans from. The Samaritans were foreigners that were brought into the land by the Assyrians and eventually adopted the Judean faith. So we have this king, Assyria, who at the time was the dominant world empire. We could say it was like the New World Order. Maybe he was the Klaus Schwab of that day. Who knows? But he is offering the people peace. But is it the kind of peace that the people of Yahweh are promised? Y'all better all say no. No. Okay. So this is kind of where I'm getting at. When we look at modern Israel, and I'll just try to tie this up in a neat little bow. We have 1948, where basically the mandate was expiring. I think it was going to expire on the 15th of May that year, if I remember correctly. And so they were going to pull out. They had just fought World War II. They were done. They're like, we're just going to go home and lick our wounds. And so the government of Israel declares its independence the day before. That's where we have May 14th as the Independence Day of Israel. So that's the date on the calendar when everybody says the state of Israel was born. But if we look at what we see, and if we're honest with ourselves, when we look at what has happened in the land of Israel since then, it hasn't been peaceful. It's been a series of treaties. It's been alliances with other governments. It's been seeking military power. We're talking about the Iron Dome right now. That comes from America. That comes from NATO. So the government, and I want to make the distinction, the government, just like Hezekiah or Zedekiah in his day, the government is putting their faith in the nations around them to deliver them, when they should be putting it in the Father. But just like in Jeremiah's day, yes, you've got that basket of bad fruit, but you've also got a basket of good fruit. I can't stand it when people talk about how all the Jews over in the land are the synagogue of Satan. They're all Khazars. They're all this. Like, you know, we can go down that rabbit trail and we can say maybe there's some truth to some of that. But I believe with all my heart that there's a good number of decent people there that are actually following the Father the same way we are. And so the way I see it, there in the political landscape, in what we call the nation of Israel, we have good fruit and we have bad fruit. But if we remember, let's just go back and read. Let's go back to Matthew 24. Because this was the kind of kicker for me on this. Matthew 24. Remember when that crop of bad figs comes in, or we'll say inferior figs comes in. It comes in the spring. And some of them are edible, some of them are good, but generally the crop is one that gets thrown out. When we go back to Matthew 24, verse 32, now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So at the time when this particular fig tree that he's talking about, and we're saying Israel is the fig tree nation, is putting forth its leaves, summer is near, which means we're not in summer yet when that happens. So any fruit that we see on this tree is going to be that first crop. And so where I'm going with this is when we're looking around and we're trying to identify the fig tree, where does the fig tree sit prophetically on the timeline? If we're looking over to the nation of Israel, I think we're seeing this right here. We're seeing the spring crop. Yes, it's part of the fig tree. Yes, it's a crop. Yes, there's good fruit. But the summer hasn't come yet. The summer is when the crop comes in full. That's when you have that sweet fig come in. And that's where I think we're a part of. Because some of you guys have been in this long enough to have seen the history of what we call the Hebrew roots or the Messianic, the Torah movement. In my reckoning, you can track it all the way back towards maybe embryonically, maybe Herbert Armstrong. I think it started to pick up steam in like the 60s and 70s. You had like guys like Dean Wheelock, the Hebrew Roots magazine. As far as I know, that's where the term comes from. And then you had, throughout the course of the 90s, you had Brad Scott, you had Monty Judah, 99, Brian, you said you started in 99. So like we have all of these, it's picking up steam over the years, and people have been spending that whole time kind of identifying what is Israel? What does it look like? Is it really only Jewish people, or is it something bigger than that? Is it really only people with a certain DNA, or is it bigger than that, but inclusive of that? Because it has to be inclusive of it. So we've been going through that, and now I think we're at a time where it's like, okay, collectively we in this Torah movement, whatever we want to label it, are starting to kind of get a handle on, okay, we know what Israel looks like. We can identify Romans 11. We're grafted in. Now, what does that mean for me personally? What does it mean for my family? What does it mean for my community? And I think it means that we have the opportunity to be a part of that summer crop. And so when I'm looking at Israel as the fig tree nation, and I'm looking at prophetic timelines, and I'm looking at Israel to know where we're at on the clock, I'm looking over there, I'm looking at Judea, I'm looking at Jerusalem, but I'm also looking here at Pennsylvania. I'm looking in America, I'm looking in California, I'm looking anywhere the people of Yahweh dwell who are grafted in. And so to me, I think we're seeing this summer crop starting to come in. At least I hope. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but I like to think we're part of that summer crop. And so, when we look at prophecy, let's look big picture instead of small picture. Like small picture, yes, what's going on at the Holy Land is massively relevant, but it's much bigger than that. The tree is so much bigger. It's got 2 crops. It's got 2 types of fruits. Both types of fruits get brought before the Father. Sounds a little bit like judgment to me, the sheep and the goats, the wheat and the chaff, that kind of thing. Anyway, that was all I had today. Hopefully that made sense. If anything, you learned a Spanish word, breva. I don't know what it means, but it sounds cool. So I'm just going to wrap it up there. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or strong opinions?